And, there was a bit of tension, a bit of frisson there, and I think it made them come through.
Yeah, it's hard to describe a relationship. They either say Martin did everything, or the Beatles did everything. It was neither one, George had done little of no rock and roll when we met him, and we'd never been in the studio, so we did a lot of learning together.
The Beatles, for all their genius and charm, were never going to be your model employees. As much as they reshaped music and culture, they also shredded the rule book on how a band should behave.
To me, she's happy as can be, she said so.
Toying with the expectations of everyone from their adoring fans to the hapless record executives trying to keep up with their meteoric rise. Among those caught in their orbit was George Martin, the classically trained producer who helped turn their raw talent into a revolution.
So he came to see me and he played me an acetate of the Beatles, and it was terrible. It was awful. But there was something in there that I thought was worth listening to. I said, look, I can't judge it on this, Brian. If you want me to look at this group, bring them. I've got to see them. Mm-hmm.
By all accounts, Martin was patient, professional, and unflappably English, but even his legendary composure couldn't survive unscathed when faced with the group's particular brand of mischief. "You are bastards, aren't you?" he once said, with a mix of exasperation and admiration. It was one of the rare moments when the Beatles truly tested his limits, and yet, in its own ridiculous way, it captured something essential about their relationship, and about the band themselves.
And I said, come and listen to this. It just needs a couple of bits of patching with the voice. We'll double track a couple of bits. And by 3 o'clock, he'd got his bit done. I said, right, now I'm going to do a little score, and I'll write for some string quartet and a couple of woodwind, add it on top, and we'll mix it, and then I'll send it back.
The scene in question unfolded in early 1964, at the height of Beatlemania. The Beatles had decamped to Paris for a series of concerts at the Olympia Theatre. A venue more accustomed to hosting the likes of Edith Piaf than 4 shaggy-haired Liverpudlians. France, it must be said, was slow to embrace the group's charms. Their early records had been met with a Gallic shrug, and the local press seemed baffled by the hysteria they generated elsewhere. Still, the concerts were a sellout, and by this point the band's fame had spread across Europe like wildfire. They had just scored their first US #1 with I Want to Hold Your Hand.
I think you'll understand when I say that something.
And the world was beginning to wake up to the fact that this wasn't just another pop act. This was something seismic. But no sooner had the Beatles begun conquering one market than the suits at EMI were fretting about another, specifically the German market. For all their success, there was a lingering concern that the language barrier might limit their appeal in non-English speaking countries.
It was quite crazy.
Who spoke German?
George and I spoke a little bit because we learned it at school, but we didn't know it wasn't madly useful. I mean, the only bit, the only thing we knew actually was Jakob wurde Frechte von allen Vögeln, die ich je gesehen habe. Which means, roughly when translated, Jacob was the cheekiest of all ravens I have ever seen.
It was a common assumption in the industry at the time, one that had seen countless artists record versions of their songs in French, Italian or Spanish to appease local audiences. The logic was simple. If you wanted Germans to buy your records, you needed to sing in German. EMI's German subsidiary, Odeon Records, insisted that the Beatles follow suit. The plan was to record I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves You in German, with translated lyrics and guidance from a translator. George Martin, ever the diplomat, passed on the request to the band. Their reaction was predictable. They laughed. "That's absolute rubbish," Martin recalled. And really, who could blame them? To the Beatles, who had already spent years refining their sound in the clubs of Hamburg, the idea of singing in German must have felt like a regressive step, a compromise they neither wanted nor needed. But Martin, caught between the band and the label, knew he had to persuade them. "If we want to sell records in Germany, that's what we've got to do," he told them. Reluctantly, the Beatles agreed, and a session was scheduled at EMI's Pathé Marconi studios in Paris. Otto Demmler, a German record executive, brought in Camillo Felgen, a translator and lyricist, to help the band navigate the linguistic minefield. It was all set to be a quick and efficient operation, 2 songs, a few hours in the studio, job done. What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, everything. On the day of the session, the Beatles simply didn't show up. Martin, Demler and Felgen waited at the studio, growing increasingly frustrated as the minutes ticked by. Eventually Martin rang their hotel, where he got through to Neil Aspinall, the band's road manager. Aspinall, sounding sheepish, delivered the bad news. "I'm sorry, they're not coming. They asked me to tell you." Martin was incredulous. "You mean to tell me they're telling you to tell me? They're not telling me themselves?" he asked. Aspinall confirmed that this was indeed the case. At this point, most people would have thrown their hands up in despair. But George Martin was not most people.
Sneak into the canteen and lock the door and then sort of come back beaming all over their faces. You know. I knew exactly what they did. And they would giggle a bit. But generally, I must say this for them, they never really did it when they were working hard. They did it at the end of the session as a kind of relaxation. And they never, at that time, they were not into anything worse.
Furious but determined, he headed straight for the George V Hotel, dragging Demler and Felgen along with him. If the Beatles thought they could avoid the session with a bit of cheeky delegation, they were sorely mistaken. When Martin arrived at the hotel, he expected to find the band in the throes of rock and roll debauchery. After all, this was the Beatles, the biggest band in the world, ensconced in one of Paris's most luxurious hotels. Surely there would be chaos. Groupies, smashed furniture, perhaps even the odd illicit substance. What he found, however, was something far more surreal. The Beatles were having tea. Not the kind of tea that might euphemistically describe a raucous party, but actual tea with cups, saucers and biscuits. Jane Asher, Paul McCartney's girlfriend at the time, was seated at the centre of it all, pouring tea with the grace and poise of a Victorian governess.
I think it calms you down. It's hard to tell because it was so different, life out there. It'll be easier to tell now that I'm back and we're doing sort of ordinary things, to see just what it does.
As soon as I entered, they exploded in all directions, Martin later recounted. They ran behind couches and chairs, and one put a lampshade over his head. It was, by all accounts, a scene of pure farce. The Beatles, like a group of naughty schoolboys caught in the act, were attempting to defuse the situation with their trademark charm. From behind their makeshift hiding spots, they began calling out in unison, "Sorry, George! Sorry, George! Sorry, George!" Martin, to his credit, managed to keep his temper in check. Barely. "You are bastards, aren't you?" he said, half laughing, half exasperated. Then, regaining his composure, he gestured toward Demler. "Are you going to apologise to Otto?" The band, sensing that the joke had run its course, emerged from their hiding places and offered a chorus of sheepish apologies. "Sorry, Otto. Sorry, Otto," they mumbled. Eventually, Martin managed to corral them into the studio, where they recorded the German versions of their hits. "Komm, gib mir deine Hand" was completed by overdubbing new vocals onto the original instrumental track of I Want to Hold Your Hand, while Sie liebt dich required a complete re-recording, as the original 2-track recording of She Loves You had been erased. The session, despite its rocky start, was a success, and the songs were released in Germany soon after. In hindsight, the entire exercise was a pointless charade. The English versions of the songs performed just as well in Germany as anywhere else, proving that the Beatles' appeal transcended language barriers. For the band, the experience was little more than a humorous footnote in their career, a reminder of the absurdities they often encountered on their journey to global domination. For George Martin, however, it was a rare moment of frustration in an otherwise harmonious relationship. As the producer who had guided the Beatles from their scrappy beginnings to the pinnacle of pop music, he understood better than anyone the delicate balance between their creative brilliance and their mischievous tendencies. They were, after all, very charming people, he later admitted. And in the end, who could stay mad at the Beatles, even when they were, as he so memorably put it, absolute bastards? Yet this story isn't just about tea parties and lampshades, it's a snapshot of a unique dynamic, one that defined not only their relationship with Martin, but also their entire approach to their career. The Beatles were never interested in playing by the rules, whether those rules were set by record labels, producers, or even societal norms. They pushed boundaries, challenged conventions, and, occasionally, tested the patience of those around them. But they did so with a disarming charm that made it impossible to hold a grudge. What's perhaps most remarkable is how this dynamic played out over the years. Martin, for all his frustration that day in Paris, remained their steadfast collaborator, guiding them through their most ambitious projects and helping to shape the sound that would define a generation. And the Beatles, for all their irreverence, never lost their respect for the man who had believed in them when few others did. It was a partnership built on mutual trust, even when that trust was momentarily tested by an ill-fated attempt to crack the German market. In the end, the tea party at the George V Hotel is more than just an amusing anecdote. It's a testament to the extraordinary bond between a group of young musicians and the producer who helped them achieve greatness. It's a reminder that even the most iconic figures in music history were, at their core, human, flawed, mischievous, and occasionally infuriating, but always undeniably brilliant.